Good afternoon, everyone. We are on the panel number 5 today, and we'll be accompanied by my friends, Indonesian friends, I can say Indonesian hero, at least Indonesian warrior. Yeah? And also to benefit from other countries in the regions, we have also our friends here, Jojo of MongoPay. PayMongo, sorry. PayMongo. And next to him sitting is Mbak Ayu. I think almost everybody knows Mbak Ayu. She's the founder of Duanyam. Duanyam is Anyam in English is webbing. Yeah? Webbing. And Duanyam is now becoming the vendors. One of the 12, if I'm mistaken, please correct me. One of the 12 vendors supply the product to IKEA globally. And I think Indonesia, at least I myself, I'm very proud of Duanyam. Sitting next to her is, I think everybody knows, Chief Gibran or Mas Gibran? Oh, Mas Gibran. Mas Gibran is our Vice President-elect. Yeah. But this one is Chief Gibran. I met with Chief Gibran when I was in the office, in the ministry office. I was curious, what is the e-fishery during that time, And no, we are focusing on how to feed the fish. How do you feed the fish, using the technology, which is actually you deploy the IoT. And I still remember you explained to me saying that we can measure what kind of the fish food that we have to prepare, in terms of weight from their movement, using the IoT. And then Chief Bijaksana Junior Sano, how should I address you? Sano. That's easier for me, Sano is the founder and CEO of the Waste for Change. And we will see the proof. After this event, we will see that this room will be back into the very clean. Sano in his startup is, I consider as the waste eater. Yeah. I still remember, I used to work for the cement company. Yeah, the cement company. Cement company is really a waste eater, Why? Because if we remember when we experienced the crazy ox, sapi gila, in Europe, so the cement company, they put the ox, and put it into the and into the kiln. Yeah. So I think it's good for the environment and it's good as well for the cement company. So they reduce the consumption of the coal using the ox. Okay, without further ado, we have to round off sessions. For the first sessions, I think it's panelists starting from, I think ladies first lah, from Ayu, then we'll deliver more or less 5 minutes, the presentations, what have you done, how do you deploy the technology. Not all startup are tech startup here, but at least how do you deploy the technology if you're deploying the technology. But the most important thing is how can we support the development of the small, medium enterprises, the micro, small, medium enterprises. Because our theme for particularly in these sessions is how a startup can support or empower the small, medium enterprises in order to improve their economic activities. Without further ado, please, Mbak Ayu.
Okay. Thank you very much, Chief Rudiantara. And it's definitely an honor and privilege to be here with my mentors, Chief Rudy, Mas Gibran Bangsano, and Jojo, Mr. Jojo, right? Just checking, we're not using slides, right? So we're just gonna share. So basically, I'm the co-founder of Duanyam and also now my second company, Crealogy. And in Duanyam, we as a social enterprise, we try to connect the local wisdom, which is wicker weaving, from the remote areas of Indonesia. We connect that skills using the abundant natural resources in the area to the market. Right, that's essentially what we do in Duanyam. Right now, we are working with over 1,200 weavers in Flores and also in South Kalimantan. And we sell high quality products to wholesale corporates domestically and also abroad. As Pak Rudiantara mentioned, we supply big companies like IKEA and also other like the Body Shop, banks and so on. So I think in the journey with Duanyam itself, definitely what's really, we see difficulties in terms of in the grassroots and actually the community in the rural areas is the lack of access and lack of network, lack of information. Right, and that's why it's very, very difficult for the community-based enterprise, for the micro enterprise, for the especially ultra micro and small enterprises to go on to the next level. And that's kind of what we in Duanyam, me and my co-founders are able to try to connect what the remote areas community can produce in good quality, but they have no idea what's the standard, what kind of demand is needed from the market, domestically and also global. So bridging that gap is what is actually necessary. And once we are able to do this, we really can create a local economy, a whole sort of new industry in Flores, right? This is like if we go to Jogja or Cirebon, they already have like craft industry that's already grown for like 40, 50 years, supplying to global brands. But in Flores, we're essentially bridging this and building this from zero, right? So all the supply chain from the raw materials, how to procure it, what kind of prices, the logistics, everything we have to do it from zero. And I think when we started Duanyam 10 years ago, so this is our 10th year anniversary, we have to do everything on our own, right? And through that experience, that trial and error, all the learnings, other networks, we decided to create the second company called Crealogy. And the whole goal is to become an ecosystem enabler for thousands of other, if not millions of other micro, small enterprises so that they could learn from our trial and errors. They could utilize our system, our learnings, and make or accelerate their growth from an idea stage to like an ultra micro stage to micro stage, and then growing all the way to small and medium enterprises. So that is what we are trying to do in Crealogy. Also, in Duanyam, you know, the reason why we're able to access financing, right? Whether from impact investors, whether that's from crowdfunding, whether that's also from soft loan or working capital loan providers from Indonesia and also from abroad, is because we have good data. Right, so when we say we work with 1,000 weavers, we can show them since 2017, like how many products are being made by each individual artisans and what kind of income they make, you know, even what quality grade the products they make. And when we begin, we start this very manually. So we have like a report book for weavers, for every weavers. Someone took a picture and then move it to Excel. And then that process becomes very, very tedious and takes a very long time, right? So that in 2019, when we already have more than 700 weavers, we started to create like a very simplified mobile app so that our field agents could actually input the data inside the apps, and so we can analyze, you know, the payment data, the production data, using the apps. So this is this is where, in a way, digitalization that is actually needed by our field agents to reduce the time by half of the time that they need to do to input the data by writing it on paper and using a big calculator to calculate all the pricings and payment and so on. So that's what we started as our internal system in Duanyam. And in Kreology, we try to open it up so that other micro enterprises could also use that. Very simplified, it's not very fancy, but it's just helping them so that they get access to their data, they can analyze it, and they can use it to help inform what kind of investment, what kind of growth, and what kind of, in the end, working capital financing that they can do. So essentially in Kreology, it's the core would be three things, which is the first one, the education, and then the second one would be the digitalization to help micro and small enterprises, and then the third one is the access to information, access to potential market, access to potential financing. So with that, we are hoping that we are able to support the acceleration, the unleashing of potential by millions of other micro and small enterprises. Thank you.
Thank you, Ayu. I think all of us here are impact startup. Yeah. Can you share with us to give us more flavors? Yeah? What impact has your startup as an outcome of your activities to the people, to the whether woman or the ecosystem, mostly in the eastern part of Indonesia? Please.
Okay, thank you, Pak. So with Duanyam itself, we work with over 1,200 women artisans. We increase their income on average by 40%, but up to 100% for the most productive weavers. And we also provided not just economic empowerment, but also some other social programs, including like scholarship for nutritious food for the children and grandchildren of the weavers. And we achieved this by, one, some of our clients, even our US buyers, wanted to provide additional, from their profit, they allocate this, right? We also collaborate with other organization and foundation who wanted to support community in Eastern Indonesia, but do not have the access. They don't know how to distribute it. So we come in there and we coupled this with the productivity. So the weavers with better quality, better consistent production timeline, they're able to be prioritized for this type of social program as well. And in terms of Kreology itself, we actually already provided the training to more than 10,000 micro and small enterprises. We have like online modules for how to become entrepreneur, but very, very basic one, the supply chain, basic supply chain management for micro enterprises. And it has been watched by almost 200,000 online participants at that time, because we were also part of the Prakerja program at that time. And we've already connected 200 micro and small enterprises to new market. And we are increasing their overall business skills and knowledge by more than 50%. Okay.
Yeah. You mentioned that you're managing 1,000 artisans or something like that. Right? So we do believe that in Indonesia, there are more tens of thousands or probably hundreds of thousands artisans in Indonesia. So, how do you think to address this opportunity in Indonesia? What kind of strategy you think that you can accelerate more or scaling up your activities? So probably not only one Duanyam, probably we can have another 10 or 100 Duanyam. Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah, exactly. So that's what we are trying to do with Kreology, Pak. So we already trained 10,000. So we begin during pandemic, so it's been our 3 years anniversary now with Kreology. So we trained 10,000, and I think we are excited to train hundreds of thousands more, and we do this by collaboration, right? Because I think there's a lot of programs trying to support micro entrepreneurs, but they're like one-off programs, and that's what we want to not just train them, provide them education, but onboard them to the community. Onboard them and engage them with the digital community, just the online WhatsApp community, and provide them with opportunity and networks to new programs that can support them as well.
Okay, thank you. I think next we have Chief Gibran here. Yeah, e-fishery is no longer right now. Yeah, it's no longer only feeding the fish. In the early stage, yes, it is feeding you. But you are developing the ecosystem. You are also providing some sort of the access for financing to your ecosystem to fish farmer or something like that, you know. So, what do you think, yeah, or what kind of thinking you had, yeah, initially in the early stage, and what kind of the changes of your thinking right now? Because again, you are no longer the early stage startup, you are later startup, and I believe that you are unicorn already. Again, from the technology point of view, and as well from the grassroots entrepreneurship of view. Yeah. You are no longer entrepreneur, but you are developing the entrepreneur, which is the fish farmer. Please.
Yeah, so I think the idea of eFishery since the beginning has always been to create an ecosystem to connect the farmers. Because when I had an idea to create a feeding machine to feed the fish automatically and connect it to the internet, I spoke to other founders in Indonesia, especially the one that started e-commerce. Zaki was there. And he actually inspired me on how internet was able to disrupt other sectors. Especially on the other part of the world, in the US and China. So on that thought process, I was trying to figure out whether we do have a possibility by leveraging the data that generated by our IoT to solve problems as for small-scale fish farmers. And I knew the problems well because I was a farmer myself, right? I came from a grassroots entrepreneur's background to understand that 97 of fish and shrimp farmers in Indonesia are small-scale farmers. In a small-scale farmers, you have many disadvantages on the supply chain. Your volume is too small. If you want to get, you can't get access to the formal financing. You need to sell to the middleman in the price that you can't really control. Then the idea of eFishery is that if we have enough data for farmers that using our technology, then we can use the data to build some sort of like aggregation and consolidation. Then we can give the small-scale farmers the consolidated volume for them to have the rights and purchasing powers of the big guys. And it actually happens in many conglomerate, especially in agriculture industry. In poultry, for example, in Indonesia, the poultry is controlled by a vertically integrated players that owning the volume from the upstream to the downstream. But it's not really happening in the aquaculture sector because the market is too fragmented. And the fragmentation happens because naturally it's distributed with the vast natural resources and long coastal line that we have right now. So if we can have the data and equip the farmers with the sets of technology, then with the data we can consolidate the volume, then they will have that level of purchasing power to buy directly from the feed manufacturers and bypass the middleman. So that was the idea. So it has always been the roadmap starting from a device and build the data, and from the data then we built a marketplace. And that's what we were. And I think we started at the beginning by solving the same problems that we were solving from the IoT solutions, which is on the feed cost. So we knew that they bought the feed directly from the feed distributors and middlemen in the retail price. Then we tried to cut the middlemen and consolidate volume from the farmers and to be able to buy directly from the feed manufacturers in a factory outlet price. So that was the idea. And I think the connectivity on the financing came quite surprisingly because we didn't know that it was even possible. And I think it was the time when the fintech was starting to rise and the peer-to-peer lending was starting to rise. And then when I spoke to one of the farmers, I realized that the farmers has disadvantages if we talk about the formal financing because they couldn't get access to the formal financing from the banks. So the alternative financing that they could get access from is from the local middlemen, from the loan sharks. That one farmer that I had a conversation with received financing in 50 to 60% per annum rate for a productive loan for fish farming, which is massively expensive if we compare to productive loan from the formal financing. So we had the idea that because we captured the productivity of each of the farmers, what's the biggest cost that they're doing, what's the harvest that they're doing. So essentially we can create and forecast their capability to repay the loan. So that's why we created our own credit scoring, but not for the farmers using psychrometric or anything else, but for the pond itself, for the fish. That's why our initial pitch that we can build the first credit scoring for fish, because we can know whether the fish or the pond itself can actually productive enough for them to repay the loan as a source of repayment. And then we connect to the likes of financial institutions, and Amarta is one of our most important funders and financing partners throughout the platform. So we solved that gap, right, on what they didn't have direct access to formal financing. The alternative financing is too expensive for them. Right now, with the technology, with the digital connectivity, they could get access on doing that. But enabling the end-to-end ecosystem is also what de-risks the whole investments, because we know that we provide loan through in-kind product, through the feed, but we also have other ecosystem to offtake the loan to assure that we use the fish as a collateral. So it's also safe for our funding partners to provide the loan for fish farmers that if they do it by themselves, it would be too risky for them. So I think bridging through partnership will create a healthier ecosystem, because as a tech companies in specific industry niche, we're able to provide our own expertise and the data that was not available before. But through partnership with the fintech, then we can leverage and push the industry even further, because we own the ecosystem, and then we can get the access for financing from other platforms that can help, eventually helping the grassroots entrepreneurs to grow, and that's what we've been seeing over the past 10 years.
Okay, thank you. This is shown that collaborations between and among the startup is very possible, I think, in Indonesia. Yeah, e-Fisheries is focusing on the fish feeding and the farmers, and then enter into collaboration with the fintech lending or something like that. Who knows? Later on, you will also collaborate with another startup with another business model. By the way, do you have some sort of the study on the numbers? Yeah, how the improvement, economic improvement, the welfare of the farmers before becoming the part of the member of the e-Fishery, and after e-Fishery, that can be shared to us.
So currently we have more than 200,000 farmers joining our ecosystem. We call ourselves more like a digital cooperative model, that farmers are part of those ecosystem. And those 200,000 farmers are spread all across Indonesia in 29 provinces. And I think there are a few different angles that we can provide benefit for the farmers. I think the first is that we can reduce the feeding cost, which is the largest cost. It's a 28% feed reduction. And also we can shortening the harvest cycle and essentially increase their annual throughput by 35%. And all in all, it can almost double their income. So the economic improvement could be 70% up to 98%. Economic improvement before joining in a fishery, and after joining a fishery. And we've seen many stories that a part of the numbers and how the farmers can grow their productivity and number of ponds. So there's one farmer that initially they only own 2 ponds, and they've been doing farming for 20 years, only own 2 ponds. But after joining a fishery, right now he's operating 12 ponds right now. It's essentially 6 times increase productivity. Before and after joining a fishery. And this enables those farmers to be able to take their kids to the high school and university. So I think the impact on the community and also the next generation for people in the rural area are amazing, and that's what keep us going forward.
Thank you, Chief Gibran. Yeah. We know that the e-Fishery market in Indonesia, the untapped one is more than 90 billion US dollars, And I think e-Fishery right now, yes, you are a unicorn, but I think you're only representing a fraction of percentage of the e-Fishery business in Indonesia. How do you think that you can scaling up this model, yeah, to empower another small micro enterprises in Indonesia, particularly on the fish ecosystem, but probably in general in the animal farm ecosystem.
Yeah, so I think definitely technology is the true solution for the scaling part, because that's what makes it scalable, and we're going to invest even more to the technology side of it. So I think one of the examples that we just did and we just launched is that we worked through an LLM by simply creating an AI for the farmers to be able to interact and ask about anything about the pond and anything about the fish farming issues, but using very local language, using Javanese language. So the farmers in the middle of rural area can ask everything about their own farm and everything about the science of aquaculture, and the app will answer it intuitively using the local language for them to do that. So it's important to have that level of scalability, because if we educate the farmers to use enough digital technology and create enough digital technology to be able to ground it so the farmers can use it, then that's what makes scalability realized. So I think that's the first thing. But the second thing is also on the community building side of it. So we have people on the ground and to build community to assure that it's not just about building a transaction to the farmers and helping them to connect our platform and then buy and sell the product. We need to be able to integrate to their whole livelihood and the well-being of their community and the family. Because I think we learn from middlemen. I mean, why middlemen is so successful, because it's not just about transaction, right? Because the middlemen provide quote-unquote scholarship for the children. They can access for the soft loan for whatever the household needs. So that's why it's hard for us to switch, and the middleman has strong foothold on the community. But sometimes for the wrong side, because they extract too many economic value that should be fairly exchanged to the farmers. But we want to implement and using the same model to be able to provide an overall well-being for the farmers and access to education for the kids by working and partnering with other NGOs and other platforms, and also helping the community to strive on top of the business that we do have right now.
Okay, thank you. That's what we call as an impact, Now is your turn, Jojo. Jojo is the CEO and founder of the PayMongo.
I am not the founder, but I am the CEO. Yeah.
You are CEO of PayMongo, because share with us what is PayMongo basically.
Okay, thank you. Good afternoon, and thank you for having me here. I think I have a quick presentation. It's about 75 slides that I will talk through in 5 minutes, right? No, it's about 15. So PayMongo is a payment aggregator. It's a payment facilitator, and our main vision and objective is really bring is the presentation coming up? Is to bring the SMEs online, take them away from the rigorous process of selling their products offline, and then let them play into the internet economy as well as the big companies. And we do this by making it a lot easier for them to get into the online facility. We do this by making it a lot easier for them to onboard their customers. We do it by also exposing them to more markets. Previously, offline, they probably are just, their customers are those who can only afford to pay in cash. By bringing them online, we're able to give them an opportunity to open it up to other customers who might be paying by credit card, by debit card, by wallets, buy now, pay later. So we're trying to level the playing field online by bringing them into the internet economy and actually succeeding. So how do we make it easy for them? So for merchants, for SMEs whose products and services are basically being sold in one province. Okay, so this is my presentation. I'll just now go. Just like any other, just like in Indonesia, the economy of the country is also driven by SME. So SME is the backbone of our products and services. Again, as we are saying, we are basically riding in the wave of digital payments being at the core of all of these SMEs, and it's their ability to use digital payments to basically bring their products online, right? Again, as I was earlier saying, previously, it was very difficult for merchants to really get online because of, a lot of documentations needed. They don't have the necessary resources to bring to the market. They don't have. They have to apply for the government to get online license. They have to basically partner with banks so that they'll be given access. But what PayMongo did was to make it a lot easier for them. We created new channels by which they can play also. If they're selling on Facebook, it will be a lot easier for them. We can also connect them to their customers. We also open them up to, as I said earlier, a lot of payment methods that will expose their products and services also to other customers. More importantly, we design products and services that will allow them to be able to sell their products online quite seamlessly. If you have a website, we connect to your APIs. If you don't have a website and you sell through TikTok or through Facebook, we create links for you. If you have Shopify and all of these other e-commerce platforms, then we connect you to them. In essence, what we have done over the past 5 years was we were able to bring as much as about 20,000 SMEs online. And then we have, as was mentioned earlier, the impact of PayMongo had been developing certain sectors of the markets where SMEs play and enhancing success and growth of these sectors through these 20,000 merchants. By digitizing payments, PayMongo is just not facilitating transactions, but also we're enabling success. And all throughout the journey of success, we are with the SMEs and bringing them to the next level of new products and services. My key example in all of this is really a company called Bebang's Halo Halo, which is basically selling some unique delicacy online. This is normally not done online, but the essence of this is that you were able to get them online, and then since they were onboarded, they have grown 8 times, 2 years in the making, right? But not only are they able to grow, we were also able to give them access to finance. We're giving them access to the opportunity to also come up with new products and services that are required by the customers. And then part of the success of Bebang is that they were already doing offline, but they were not as successful. When they went online, they became more successful. And now they're going back offline and actually using digital payments as a method of payment. They're able to even expand their businesses very well. Recently, we have opened up Bebang's Halo Halo and hundreds of SMEs also to the opportunity to have access to finance. So we've partnered with banks that will allow Bebang, through its performance, to have access to finance. And access to finance for us means that it will now enable them to be a lot more aggressive in terms of growing. But it also allows us to view Bebang or other SMEs how serious they are with their business. So we only lend money to them if they are able to if we're able to get the payment from the payouts that is going through them, and that means they're serious about their business. So we have our impact has been we have the companies that we have brought into our lending platform have increased their business by at least 10% and are growing approximately on a monthly basis by about 6%. So this is PayMongo. We revolutionize modern finance by fostering collaboration with banks and fintechs and providing SMEs with accessible financial services.
Salamat po.
Walang anuman. Thank you.
Jojo, just to give us a context, most of audience are Indonesian. We know we have Indonesia, the payment aggregator as well in Indonesia. But in your case, PayMongo not only acting as the payment aggregator, but you also providing some sort of the lending, right?
Yes.
So, who actually providing the lending? Is it your company or other institution? How do you develop this business model? That is number one. Number two, again, just to give us a context, Indonesia, we have more than 60 million micro, small, medium enterprises. How about in Philippines? Since both countries are considered still in the emerging countries, where our GDP is not much different between Indonesia and Philippines. Probably you can share with us from that angle as well, So we will see that at the end, as an impact startup, what kind of impact, what kind of improvement that delivered by your company, for the people, particularly for the bottom of pyramid.
Okay, thank you. Maybe I'll answer the second question first. We have officially around 1 million SMEs. Unofficially, we have about 25 million MSMEs, right? So, and maybe like Indonesia, this has been the core of the thrust of the Philippine government, particularly the central bank. And I think the reality of achieving success in giving access to finance to SMEs has been brought about by the pandemic, right? So after the pandemic, everybody, even the MSMEs, have started to accommodate and embrace the use of digitization, and payments and settlements have been happening. Now, on your first question, yeah, you have the likes of payment aggregators in the country, in Indonesia, in the Philippines, we also have that. But the competition there is really tough, and so that the SMEs are not benefiting from it because not all SMEs will allow themselves to be deducted an MDR for every transaction that happens, right? So we thought that this is not the best way by which to approach the market. So what we've done is that we've created wallets for them. We extend this up beyond payments. We extended it to financial services. But we have a very, very unique approach to lending, wherein instead of asking them for collateral, we ask them to be successful. If you're successful and if you're continuously growing, you will allow PayMongo to basically offer you loans with the banks. Actually, the banks are the ones lending. We partner with banks. So the banks will only lend you money if your business is really growing and if you're really serious about growing your business, because the money that will be lent to you is supposed to be for your business, right? In the Philippines, there's a problem with SME lending because no amount of analytics, credit scoring will, and I'm sure it's also the same here. If I lend the SME money, if it's a birthday of the daughter, if it's the graduation of the son, the wife gets sick, the money that's been borrowed naturally goes to that. In the Philippines, there is this assessment study that says that actually SMEs borrow a second loan to pay for the first loan, right? So we're trying to basically deviate from that and make them successful so that the payment of the loan will be taken out from their day-to-day sales. And that gives us an opportunity. So far, after 5 months, we have had 0 NPL. Everybody's able to pay simply because
zero NPL.
Yeah, 0 NPL because we're just taking it away, taking it from their daily sales, and they allow that to happen. And if you're serious with your business, you will allow that the payment for the loan will be taken from your sales. So that's the unique proposition that we have. So far, so good. We've had about 70 borrowers, and then after 3-4 months, it's zero NPL.
Is zero collection basically is regulated or unregulated in Philippines?
It's regulated. It's a lending regulation. However, the only reason why it's zero NPL is because the payment of the loan is deducted to them from their sales automatically, and they allow that to happen.
Okay, thank you. We have 4 panelists today. Chief Sano, as I said earlier, that Chief Sano and his friend is a waste eater in this country. Okay, I think I'll give you a time to share with us what are you doing, what kind of business model do you have, and how does your activities give an impact not only to the people in general in terms of addressing the waste issue, waste management issue, but also probably there is some entrepreneurs, micro, small, medium enterprises involved in your ecosystem. Please.
Yeah, thank you. Waste Fortune is a waste management business that we are offering responsible management. Because we believe currently in Indonesia, as a developing country, we still not responsible with our waste. Every day, our house, our school, our offices, it's clean. But we don't know where our waste ends up. I can ask you where your waste ends up, but you will don't know. Maybe you think it will ends up in the landfill, but not 100% of Indonesia waste ends up in the landfill. And in the landfill in Indonesia is also a problem. Most of our landfill in Indonesia is open dumping. So it's not waste management. It's just take, collect, and dump. That's it. So the leakage of waste in Indonesia, most probably around 30% are leakage to the environment. Open burning, creating air pollution, leakage to the river, leakage to the ocean, creating emergency problem. So what we are offering is responsible waste management. My personal education in environmental engineering, because I want to solve waste. That's why I'm choosing environmental engineering. So what we are doing now, we have a collection service to building, to hotel, to household, to residential, in segregate way. Minimum 2, organic 1, inorganic 1. The problem of waste is mixed at the first place. That creating huge problem. Will be more difficult to manage and more difficult to treatment if the waste are mixed. So what we are offering is segregate the waste at source minimum 2, organic, inorganic. We will collect based on the date that we agreed on. It can be daily, it can be once a week, depend on our contract. So we will collect still in segregate way because we using color code trash bag. Color code trash bag. Blue, recyclables, green, organic 1, black, residual waste. And then we will bring to our facility. It will be segregate more detail. And then we are contacting our partner, our friend, that waste eater. Plastic, we will bring to plastic factory. Paper, we will bring to paper factory. The rest that we cannot do about it, yes, we are working with cement factory. Because they are the true waste eater. Because they very need energy. So what we are currently doing, we work also with city, we work with private township like Sumarekon, BSD City, Citraland. So we are working with them also to manage their waste. In our operation, we work with informal sector, Pak. We work with waste picker, waste trader, informal sector, pretty much similar like what Gibran said, but more in a complex situation. Because waste is something that even government overlook. The policy is there, but the enforcement is not there. Number 1. Number 2, the people, majority of us, the needs only, please throw away my waste. I don't care, as cheap as possible. So the willingness to pay, ability to pay is not there for responsible. So what we are doing, we creating added value, working with digitalization, data, technology. We can summarize all the data throughout all the value chain that we have. So now, in 2020, we launched plastic credit mechanism. So currently, there is a lot of company willing to offset their packaging waste to become their responsible. So we're creating a new added value and new potential revenue to our mechanism. So that can be able for us to support the informal sector working with us. To segregate, we buying in a better price. And once again in Indonesia, the informal sector, the most problematic is the tax mechanism, Pak. Because they don't have credential, they don't have institution, company, they don't have tax identity. So it's also becoming a problem. Yeah, so that's something with what we can also helping with them. So we can bridge to them to sell the product to bigger factory based on our aggregator model also. So now we are working with 1,000, not as much as Mas Gibran, but we work with 1,000 waste picker and also informal sector. We currently in 21 cities and we manage around 25,000 tons waste per year. So that's what we currently do, Pak.
How many tons?
25,000 tons per year.
25,000 tons per year is almost 1,000 tons per year, per day.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's
2,000 ton per month, Pak.
2,000 tons
Per month. Yeah.
Oh, so less than 100 tons per day then. If we refer to my humble experience dealing with the city of Cilacap. City of Cilacap, every day they produce 120 tons municipal waste every day, you know. So if we have another Chief Sano or another Waste for Change startup in Indonesia, and we are able to scale it up, yeah, we can imagine that we can live in the more better environment, more fresh air, yeah, unlike what we experience right now in Jakarta. In Jakarta, I think 10 of thousands tons municipal waste every day that has to be managed, and most of them were burned, dumping in the Pulau Gebang and Bantar Gebang, and create unhealthy environment.
Of course.
So, what do you think, and how do you think that we can scaling up that to create more hundreds or even thousand ways to change startups? No?
Yeah, in our last 10 years experience, we learned so much. I would say Gibran, one of our friend, that if we have some challenge and everything, we come to Gibran and asking something that can opening our eyes. Oh, okay, we can go to this way, and because waste more complex compared to fish industry ecosystem or transportation ecosystem. Number one, the one who produce this product is different stakeholder. The one who sell and distribute, different stakeholder. The one who consume, the one who collect, the one who recycle. So it's really long value chains, Pak. And this value chain is once again overlooked by the government. They don't create enough policy to create a good partnership among this. So if we talk about what we can do to replicate, I believe we need to, meanwhile in our current ecosystem of waste, without law enforcement, for me, waste management or environmental should be policy driven. But waiting for the government to create a better policy driven and law enforcement, it will be very too late. So I learned a lot about how to create business model. What we are doing is creating higher added value. So this is the key, Pak. Create higher added value on the downstream to subsidize our upstream services. You can imagine, maybe hotel like this. In Jakarta, there is 170 waste collector player. Only around 40 who have permit, maybe less than 10, the one who have permit, but really committed to do the right things. So you can imagine the price, it will be very high difference. Because the other player only collect, and you will don't know where the waste ends up. It could be at night, they will throw the waste to the river. You will don't know. That's the cheapest way for collect the waste. collect at night, and then burn everywhere. You will don't know, collect at 2 at night. It will be very cheapest. But if we do properly, we will need to bring it to our facility, sort it and everything. It's created the proper treatment and proper cost. But without law enforcement, it created not a fair ecosystem. So what we do to match the willingness to pay and ability to pay, we create a higher added value in the downstream. So what we do currently, we are talking about what if the food waste that we can get from restaurant, from hotel, we can transform into protein through BSF, black soldier flies. But we don't sell the black soldier flies. We do chicken farming and we sell the egg. So creating those higher added value can subsidize the upstream collection service fee. So that's what we do.
Okay, thank you. I have one teasing question actually for my Indonesian friends. How is the upcoming government, the president, offer Mbak Ayu to be appointed as the minister in charge for tourism and creative economy? How if the upcoming president offer Chief Gibran to be appointed of Minister of Fishery? How if the upcoming president offer Chief Sano to become the Environment Minister? But you don't have to answer right now. I'll give the opportunity to the audience. Should you have any question, please raise your hand to any panelist in front of you. From the left side? From the center? From the right side? Please. You can use this one.
Hi, my name is Krishna. I'm a founder as well. So my startup actually is within the vicinity of Masano's area of interest. We're tackling electronic waste, and we're trying to enable the circular economy in electronics. So I can really vouch for whatever Masano has been saying. I guess from our perspective, right, and just as a preamble, right, I think the problem is the linear way of consumption, which is basically unsustainable, right? The linear economy basically consists of this extraction, production, distribution, consumption, and then just disposal, right? And the magical thinking is that once you consume, right, whatever the excess of it, right, would magically disappear, right? Someone will, take care of it. And that's basically creating a lot of externalities. And that's why I think globally there's this movement of the circular economy. So I guess my question to who is hopefully will be the Ministry of Environment, Masano, is what do you think needs to be done, Mas, in terms of better regulatory push? I know we're talking about market intervention here as an alternative of delivering public goods, i.e. better or sustainable waste management. But what do you think needs to be done as a matter of regulatory push, right? In terms of sort of enabling more of the circular economy, right? Because I'm part of a lot of forums, and one of them we actually have one for electronics, right? And there have been talks about creating, extended producer responsibility next year. There's a roadmap, action plan, whatever, right? But what could be a tangible thing that perhaps, the upcoming government could actually do, right, to speed up the process of enabling circularity? Thanks.
I will connect to Pak Chief Rudy Challenge ya. If I, the Minister of Environment, lu presidennya gua ini ya. I will use the biggest power that government have, unutilized yet. The ability and the authority to enforce. That's it. Environmental Ministry have very limited budget. I will invest those budget into creating the ecosystem through enforcement. Why? If we are talking about education, if we are talking about campaign, everyone can do it. You can do it, I can do it, private sector can do it, philanthropy can do it. If we are talking about infrastructure and investment, we can do it, private sector. If we are talking about anything related into the waste management or even EPR and everything, we can support. But the ability and the authority to enforce on the government, that's the one that overlooked by our government. So I will utilize my current position as a minister to do that. That will create a huge impact and huge wave of change. You can imagine, I will say, in the future, or it has to be, every company is sustainable. Because for me, it's crazy if we divide it into green company and ungreen company, black company. How come? There is no in the textbook, company is an activity to destroy environment to take profit as much as possible. No, in the textbook. So for me, every company should be sustainable. Jadi aneh gitu ya, ada perusahaan tekstil boleh buang sampah sembarangan, there is a textile factory can just throw their wastewater into the river, and the other are sustainable. That's created unfair ecosystem. That's why I believe currently the biggest possible if we want to create change, it's a policy driven. Environmental, if market driven, it's pretty much possible. I already have 15 years experience on it. People always tends to choose the cheapest one. Always. Always. If there is any sustainable company and unsustainable company, and this is weird to divide this, the unsustainable or the one who create problem always can create a cheaper price. So it's unfair. So, but we cannot rely, we only can advocate, we can only hope, we can only ask to the government. Meanwhile, in the creativity, innovation, and technology, once again, we created added values. That's what we do. We created added values. But currently, we only manage 100 tons per day. Indonesia, 175,000 tons of waste per day. Or we can build 12 Candi Borobudur every day. Or we can build 4,800 Candi Borobudur every year from waste. So pretty much we need enforcement. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there any? Don't be shy. Silakan tepuk tangan, Pak. In Indonesia, jokingly, as always said, yang tepuk tangan saya doakan masuk surga.
Amin.
Amin. I pray for the one who clap the hands, go to the heaven. Masih ada pertanyaan lagi? Silakan. If none, then, oh okay, please. Tolong, Pak.
All right. If you don't mind, I just sitting down, so I continue to my question. So this is a very, very enlightened discussion. But I was intrigued by the title here, entrepreneurship.
Excuse me, your name, please?
Oh, my name is Ari Ogam.
Yeah.
I'm from MDF, a company for a consultancy for development. We are based in Bali, and I'm staying here in Jakarta. So anyways, I was intrigued by this title, Entrepreneurship Drives Economic Transformation in Emerging Markets. So it's quite recently we are facing about the thrifting things that maybe cause some, let's say, it has an impact for some people, but it also have a bad impact, negative impact to our SMEs, for example, per se. But for your perspective, it could be anyone, or maybe for Duanyam.
How do you see this? How this can impact the industry itself, and how you can also encourage the people, the women there about this, but how also we can educate our people about thrifting is not necessarily about how we recycle or reuse about the product itself, but also it may cause the fast fashion or fast industry be more impactful to our life or sustainability things. So that's my first question. And secondly, I'm not sure if it's relevant to any of the topics since I'm joining this discussion from the early on. But I was also intrigued by, we are talking about inclusiveness, inclusivity. So we also have a concern to disabled people with disabilities, and how also we can have innovations and think how they can be driven by us to empower them in this economic transformation. So maybe we can bring up this to discussion. Thank you.
Thank you. I think
Can I take the opportunity to answer that?
The second one.
Yeah. I think that's connected. I think this topic is very important in terms of the context by which it was incorporated by Amartya in this. Entrepreneurship right now is not just about succeeding in business. You come up with an idea, and then you succeed. Your neighbors are selling these products; they're not selling it enough. You come up with a product that can sell. No? Right now, entrepreneurship is about coming up with an idea to solve a particular problem. Right. So, and the problem is not just a problem of the community. It sometimes comes up with a problem of the country or a region. No? So what you're seeing here are startups that are not coming out of a good idea, but these are startups that are trying to solve problems, right? So Waste for Change, is that Waste for Change? I mean, they have the ability to really have an impact. They're solving a major problem. E-Fisheries is solving a major problem. I forgot the name of the company. Guanyam is also solving a major problem. But the entrepreneurship transformation is all about, it's not just about, bringing this MVP and actually executing it. Entrepreneurs right now, like E-Fishery, because of their success, will have the ability to come up with new things, right? New things, right? To solve the problem, they can acquire companies actually. To solve a problem, they can basically, as Pak mentioned earlier, maybe create more e-fisheries to be able to solve problems. So the ability to expand the idea is now coming to fore. Why? Because, Indonesia has been a haven for very, very successful startups. In fact, as I said, it has become a model. And I think this is very important. And this is all for the SMEs. You have to liberate, emancipate SMEs from the things that they're currently doing. They have to find a way by which, like these startups, path to profitability, path to success, these SMEs should be also assisted to become successful. And therefore, you incentivize them, you motivate them by giving them access to finance. You cannot give access to finance to everybody, right? Not all unbanked can be banked, right? Some of the unbanked don't have money, right? So not everybody can be financially included because some of these people really don't want to be included, right? So I think this is the essence of entrepreneurship transformation. It has to have impact on society. It has to have an impact on economy.
Thank you, Jojo. Please.
Yeah. Okay, thank you, Mr. Jojo. I'll pick up on that one as well, right? And continuing to Pak Rudy's question as well, I think there's definitely two things, and maybe creative economy should be more aligned with small micro entrepreneurship ministry as well. But I think one is also to answer the question about disability is aggregators, right? Again, as Mr. Jojo point out, I think not everybody could really become entrepreneurs. We call them like micro entrepreneurs or even ultra micro entrepreneurs. But with entrepreneurship, there's some sort of like innovation and continuous agility, adaptation to what's going on. And I think when we're talking to people who are making 1 million, 2 million per month from their business, it's not entrepreneurship yet, right? They're just surviving day to day, combining their kitchen money, their own groceries money with their business. And it's very difficult to try to innovate on anything. So they're just on survival mode. And what we need is actually for the government, for any sort of programs that are supporting this, especially micro and ultra micro, to actually work with aggregators or the off-takers, right? So which means like this micro, ultra micro are actually perhaps working or selling to like those that are on medium sizes. So those are, that could actually do the innovation, the new ideas, opening up new markets, so that the micro and ultra micro are really focusing on what they're really good at. And especially in Indonesia, they actually have really good skills. They can make good products, yeah, right? But they don't have the supply chain management mindset. They don't have the financial management mindset. And trying to push them towards going through like all this MBA of how to actually bring their business from ultra micro to small or to medium, it's not for everyone, right? So, I see that there's a lot of programs trying to provide grants, trying to teach this micro and ultra micro as a one-time thing, right? And it's not sustainable. And there's even some programs trying to give them so many different like new machines, right? Like all the way from like 100 million grants for machine up to like 5 billion rupiah grants to create a small factory, but it's not sustainable. So I'm really hoping that there's more work together with the aggregators, the off-takers, the like of e-fisheries and hopefully Duanyam in each of the industry sectors, rather than trying to push each individual micro entrepreneurs to become a big one. And then the second part, if I become the minister, will be to really more enforce the procurement, sustainable procurement from micro, small enterprises, from hyper-local procurement, because there's a lot of like, businesses in Eastern Indonesia, like whether that's state-owned enterprises or they're like the hotels and resort, they wanted to buy locally, but they don't know who to buy it. Their quality is not there yet. So they continue buying just from Java and Bali, even though they're located in like Maluku or Papua, right? The logistic cost is actually more expensive. So we need to make that hyper-local ecosystem work, especially in remote parts of Indonesia where logistic is really a huge issue. So I think that's
You can share with your experience in logistic.
Oh.
How do you make a logistic from the East Nusa Tenggara to
so we're
Jawa
working
and Hong Kong? Please share with me.
Correct. So like we're working with the global buyers like IKEA, right? The cost of one container from Larantuka is Flores is 3 times the cost of one container from Hong Kong to Jakarta. So that's how big the gap is. That's how difficult it is. So that area outside of Java, maybe outside of Sumatra, Java, and Bali, really is very difficult to compete. Even though the product quality is good, even though maybe the labor cost is cheaper, the raw materials is abundant and cheaper, right? But with the logistic costs of our country that's very geographically diverse, it's so difficult. So we need to really enforce more hyper-local solution and procurement as well, especially in areas where the logistic is too expensive.
Yeah, that is homework for the upcoming minister in charge for logistic or transportation in Indonesia. I think the last one is our candidate for the ministers of fishery. Please, Chief Gibran.
Yeah, no, I think
You can imagine that Chief Gibran report to Mas Gibran later on.
Thanks a lot, Chief. No, so I think in general similar like the rest, right? The most important part is how the government can be able to roll themselves as a regulators and create a level playing field that helps unleash our true potentials and understanding on what's actually possible for the country to foster. So I think, I give some of the examples, then I'll set to what are policies that actually make sense. So one of the examples, everyone possibly know dory fish, right? But not many people, not all know that dory fish is actually catfish. So in every occasion I use it, hey, dory fish is actually catfish. which is essentially patin lah in Indonesia. And one of the biggest country producing catfish is Vietnam. It's the biggest exporters of catfish or dory fish in the world. And the reason why Vietnam is able to do that, because they has the most cost competitive catfish in the whole world. Even Indonesia couldn't really compete with them. And why they were able to do that? Because they create a catfish surrounding area of the Mekong Delta. Exactly. And every transportation and distribution is all really depending on the Mekong Delta. So they see the Mekong Delta and the Mekong River as an advantage. So that's why we never see that way, right? And it's always been that how, as an archipelagic country, the sea is our friend. It's not just our friend, it's our competitive advantage. Then we should be able to do so. And the other thing why is quite funny that we have the largest potential for aquaculture. But if we talk about the shrimp farming, India is 4 times larger for shrimp production and export, and Ecuador is 10 times bigger than us. But we're the largest. But our cost of production for export is actually 15 times higher than Ecuador and 12 times higher than India. And the reason is because it's all very distributed. In Indonesia, I mean, we have shrimp farming in Aceh and in Nusa Tenggara Timur. In India, 4 times higher production is only in the size of Java Island. In Ecuador, it's even more extreme. It's 10 times production in the size of Central Java and West Java. Yeah, exactly. Why? Because the interlogistic is cheaper. Well, India is concentrated from farming to processing companies to port. Only takes 6 hours. In Indonesia, we have farmers in Palu. If they ship to Makassar, it took 36 hours to ship. We have much lower quality, much higher logistic on doing that. So I think my idea would be to create that as an advantage, but also focusing each of the areas an advantage to create kawasan lah ya, to create districts. So one district producing catfish lele, and one district producing shrimp, and one district producing gurame, whatever it is. But we create an all integrated infrastructure on top of it. And the second, on double down on the infrastructure, I think there was some news a few weeks ago that fishermen dumping the fish that they catch, right? Because the price is just too low. So I think it gives us 2 things, right? The first, we badly need cold chain logistics, integrated cold chain throughout the countries to ensure that the fishermen, the aquaculture production, and also the overall food producers can actually have a longer shelf life. And the second is the price regulatory. Why it was so low? Because the price is not regulated. The middlemen can decided to stop it, and without any intervention from the government. And the price regulators is important. The way that the government has been very heavily involved in the likes of poultry, cabe, rice, right? And they should be even more involved to fish, because we have the largest potential in fish in the world right now. So I think that's what the policy should be.
Okay, that is the voice of the young Indonesian from the multi-sector. We need the cold storage chain, but cold storage chains need power, need electricity. I'm not saying this is vicious circle, but we have to address it in the pretty much ecosystem, end-to-end solutions. By this, right now we are late for 2 minutes actually. By this, I don't want to give a conclusion to our discussions with regard entrepreneurship, economic transformation through digitalization as an enabler in the emerging markets. It's not pretty much in structure, but at least those are the issues that we are discussing by today. By this, again, I would like to conclude this panel session number 5 by requested to give an applause to the 4 panelists in front of us. Thank you very much.